Sarah's heart shattered as she watched David's lips meet those of his secretary. Through the glass window of his office, their bodies pressed against each other in a passionate embrace. That once belonged to her. The divorce papers felt heavier than they should have in Sarah's trembling hands. 3 years of marriage, 15 years of knowing each other since they were awkward teenagers. And it had come to this, a manila envelope that would legally end what had begun as the greatest love story she'd ever known. David sat across from her at their kitchen table, the same one where they'd shared countless breakfast conversations about their dreams, their future, their forever. His dark hair was disheveled, his usually bright blue eyes dulled with exhaustion and something that looked suspiciously like relief. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. They'd bought together during their first year of marriage when everything still felt possible. "Sarah, we both know this isn't working." David's voice carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken arguments, late nights sleeping in separate rooms, and the gradual erosion of intimacy that had once defined their relationship. "We've been strangers living in the same house for months," she wanted to argue, to fight for what they'd built together. But the memory of finding him with Rebecca, his secretary, with the perfect smile, and the way she looked at David like he hung the moon still burned fresh in her mind. The image had replayed in her head for weeks, his hands tangled in another woman's hair, the hungry way he'd kissed her, the passion that had been absent from their own marriage for far too long. "The state requires a 6-month separation period," David continued, his lawyer's training evident in the clinical way he discussed the dissolution of their life together. "We can't file the final papers until then." Sarah nodded, unable to trust her voice. She'd already found a small apartment across town, a 1-bedroom space that felt like a prison sentence compared to the home they'd built together. The walls were white and sterile, nothing like the warm, lived-in feeling of their house with its mismatched furniture, and the garden they'd planted together the spring after their wedding. "I'll move out this weekend," she managed to say, though every word felt like swallowing glass. David reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers in a gesture that once would have sent electricity through her entire body. Now it just felt like goodbye. "Sarah, I want you to know that I never meant for things to happen the way they did. With Rebecca, I mean, it just don't." She pulled her hand away, the wedding ring on her finger catching the afternoon light streaming through their kitchen window. "Please don't make this about her. This is about us. About how we forgot how to love each other somewhere along the way." The silence stretched between them, filled with the ghost of their younger selves who had promised each other forever. On a warm June evening 5 years ago, they'd been so certain then, so sure that their love could weather any storm. They'd been wrong about a lot of things, but perhaps most of all about how easy it would be to keep loving each other when life got complicated. "Maybe this separation will be good for us," David said finally. "Maybe we need to remember who we are when we're not constantly hurting each other." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain and the slow death of their marriage, he was still the boy who had given her his Letterman jacket on a cold October night, their senior year of high school. He was still the man who had proposed on one knee in her parents' backyard, nervous and fumbling and perfect. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and loneliness. Sarah stood in the middle of her new living room, surrounded by boxes that contained the fragments of her former life, wondering how a marriage could be reduced to so few possessions. She'd taken the books, the coffee maker David never used, and the collection of throw pillows that had annoyed him but made her feel at home. He'd kept the house, the furniture, and apparently Rebecca. 3 weeks into their separation, Sarah was beginning to develop a routine that didn't revolve around David's schedule. She woke up when she wanted, ate cereal for dinner without judgment, and had started taking evening walks around her new neighborhood. It was during one of these walks that she met James. He was sitting on a park bench, sketching the old oak tree that dominated the small green space 2 blocks from her apartment. His concentration was complete, his hand moving across the paper with confident strokes that spoke of talent and practice. Sarah found herself slowing down, then stopping entirely to watch him work. "It's beautiful," she said when he looked up, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. James smiled, and Sarah felt something flutter in her chest, that she'd almost forgotten existed. The spark of attraction to someone new, someone who didn't carry the weight of shared history and accumulated disappointments. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm and slightly rough around the edges. "I come here most evenings when the light is good. There's something about this tree that I can't quite capture." Sarah found herself sitting beside him on the bench, close enough to see the details of his sketch but not close enough to seem forward. She was out of practice with this, the delicate dance of getting to know someone new, the careful balance between interest and availability. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that felt both foreign and thrilling. "James." His handshake was firm, his eyes kind. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" "I haven't seen you on my evening walks." "Very new," Sarah admitted, still figuring out where everything is. They talked until the sun set and the park lights flickered on, conversation flowing with an ease that surprised her. James was an art teacher at the local high school, divorced himself, with a teenage daughter who lived with him every other weekend. He didn't ask about her marriage or why she was living alone in a one-bedroom apartment, and she was grateful for his discretion. When they finally parted ways, James hesitated at the edge of the park. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? There's a great little place on Main Street that stays open late." Sarah's first instinct was to say no, to explain that she was still married, still technically committed to someone else despite the papers they'd signed. But then she remembered David's hands in Rebecca's hair, the way he'd looked at his secretary with desire that had been absent from their own relationship for so long. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. Meanwhile, David was discovering his own version of freedom. Without Sarah's quiet presence to remind him of his failures as a husband, he found himself staying later at the office, accepting invitations to happy hours with colleagues. And yes, spending more time with Rebecca. She was everything Sarah wasn't: spontaneous where Sarah was thoughtful, direct where Sarah was diplomatic, uncomplicated where his wife was layered with depths he'd never fully understood. Being with Rebecca felt like stepping into sunlight after months in shadow. "You seem different," Rebecca observed one evening as they shared takeout Chinese food in his office, the rest of the building empty and quiet around them. Lighter somehow. David considered this, twirling lo mein around his chopsticks. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'd forgotten what it felt like to not constantly disappoint someone." Rebecca moved closer to him on the small couch in his office, her hand finding his knee. "Is that what you think you were doing? Disappointing Sarah, wasn't I?" The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. "She wanted this version of marriage that I couldn't figure out how to give her. All those little intimacies, the way she wanted to talk about everything, analyze every feeling. Sometimes I just wanted to exist without having to explain myself." Rebecca's hand moved higher on his thigh, and David felt his body respond despite the conversation's serious turn. This was what he'd missed: the simple, uncomplicated desire between two people who wanted each other without the weight of shared disappointments and unmet expectations. "Maybe you weren't wrong for wanting something different," Rebecca whispered against his ear, her breath warm and inviting. "Maybe you both were just incompatible in ways that had nothing to do with failure." When she kissed him, David kissed back with the hunger of a man who'd been emotionally starved for months. This felt right, passionate and present and free from the complicated history that had made every interaction with Sarah feel like walking through a minefield. But later that night, alone in the house he'd once shared with his wife, David found himself standing in their former bedroom, remembering the early days of their marriage when making love had felt like coming home to himself. The coffee shop on Main Street had become Sarah's sanctuary. She and James had been meeting there twice a week for the past month, their conversations gradually shifting from polite getting-to-know-you exchanges to something deeper and more intimate. Tonight, as autumn rain drummed against the windows, James reached across their small table and took her hand. "I need to tell you something," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I'm falling for you, Sarah. I know the timing is complicated, but I can't pretend that what I feel is just friendship." Sarah's heart raced. She'd felt it to the growing connection, the way her days felt brighter when she knew she'd be seeing him, the increasing difficulty of remembering why she needed to maintain emotional distance. "James," she began, but her words died when she saw a familiar figure enter the coffee shop. David stood in the doorway, shaking raindrops from his dark hair, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her. His expression shifted from casual interest to surprise to something that looked almost like pain. When he noticed James holding her hand, Sarah pulled away from James as if she'd been burned, her face flushing with a guilt she had no rational reason to feel. They were separated. They were getting divorced. She had every right to move on with her life, but the look in David's eyes made her feel like she was the one who'd been caught cheating. "Sarah?" James's voice was gentle, concerned. "Are you all right?" "That's my husband," she whispered, watching. As David approached their table with the determined stride she remembered from their college days, when he was trying to solve a problem through sheer force of will. "Sarah," David's voice was carefully neutral when he reached them, though his hands were clenched at his sides. "I didn't expect to see you here. It's a public place," she replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "David, this is James, my husband David." The two men shook hands with the wary politeness of animals establishing territory. James had the advantage of height, but David had the weight of history and legal claim, however tenuous that claim might currently be. "I should go," James said, standing and gathering his jacket. "Sarah, I'll call you tomorrow." She nodded, grateful for his discretion even as she hated the way David's presence had the power to disrupt her carefully constructed new life. When James left, David slid into the vacated chair without invitation. "So that's how you're handling our separation, moving right on to the next guy, don't?" Sarah's voice carried more steel than she knew she possessed. "Don't you dare sit there and judge me for finding companionship when you've been sleeping with your secretary for God knows how long. Rebecca and I, that's different." "How is it different, David?" "Because you started before we separated. Because that makes it better somehow." David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made Sarah's chest ache. "I didn't come here to fight with you." "Then why did you come?" "I was driving by, saw you through the window, and thought I don't know what I thought." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You look good, Sarah, happy." The unexpected gentleness in his voice caught her off guard. "I'm trying to be. With him, with James?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Was she happy with James? He was kind, attentive, uncomplicated in all the ways David had become complicated. But sitting across from her husband, even in the midst of their painful separation, she felt the familiar tug of connection that had drawn them together as teenagers. "He's a good man," she said finally. "He listens when I talk. He doesn't make me feel like I'm asking for too much when I want to share what I'm thinking or feeling." David flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Is that what I did? Made you feel like you were asking for too much?" "Sometimes, yes." The honesty felt both liberating and cruel. "But I made you feel trapped, didn't I? Like I was suffocating you with all my needs and expectations." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their mutual recognition settling between them, round them. The coffee shop buzzed with the comfortable noise of other people's uncomplicated evenings. "I miss you," David said suddenly, the words escaping like a confession he hadn't meant to make. Sarah's breath caught. "David, I know I have no right to say that. I know I'm the one who destroyed what we had. But sitting in that house without you, eating dinner alone, waking up in a bed that still smells like your perfume, it's killing me." "You have Rebecca," Sarah reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. "Rebecca is." David searched for the right words. "She's not you. She's not complicated or deep or challenging. She doesn't push me to be better or call me on my bullshit or make me think about things I'd rather ignore. She's easy, Sarah, but you were worth the difficulty." Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "Were, past tense, are." David corrected quickly. "You are worth it. You've always been worth it. I was just too proud and too stupid to figure out how to love you the way you needed to be loved." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with a text from James. "Hope everything is okay. Here if you need to talk." The simple message, sent by a man who barely knew her but cared enough to check on her well-being, stood in stark contrast to the years of feeling invisible in her own marriage. "I should go," Sarah said, standing and gathering her purse. "Sarah, wait." David stood to his hand reaching for her arm. Can we talk? Really talk? Not about lawyers or paperwork or who gets what in the divorce. Just talk like we used to. Looking at him, at the man who'd been her first love, her first heartbreak, her first everything. Sarah felt the dangerous pull of nostalgia and possibility. I don't think that's a good idea, she said, even as every cell in her body screamed at her to say yes. 3 days after their encounter at the coffee shop, David showed up at Sarah's apartment with Chinese takeout and a tentative smile. I know you said talking wasn't a good idea, he said when she opened the door, but I brought mushu pork from Golden Dragon, your favorite. Sarah stood in the doorway, torn between the safety of maintaining distance and the dangerous comfort of letting him in. The smell of the food triggered a flood of memories. Late nights during law school, when David would show up with takeout after she'd been studying for hours. Sunday evenings when they were too lazy to cook, celebrations and consolations marked by cardboard containers and chopsticks. David, we can't keep doing this. We're getting divorced. We're separated, he corrected gently. There's still time before the papers are final. Against her better judgment, Sarah stepped aside and let him enter her small apartment. David looked around with undisguised curiosity, taking in her attempts to make the sterile space feel like home. You kept the throw pillows, he observed, nodding toward the couch where her collection of colorful cushions created the warm, layered look he'd always claimed was too cluttered. They make me feel at home. I miss them, David admitted. The house feels empty without your touches everywhere. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the takeout containers spread on the coffee table between them like a peace offering. For a while, they ate in comfortable silence, falling back into the easy rhythm of shared meals that had once defined their evenings together. How's James? David asked eventually, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah set down her chopsticks. He's good, kind, uncomplicated. Uncomplicated sounds nice. It is, Sarah agreed. But sometimes I find myself missing the complications, missing the depth of feeling that comes with really knowing someone, even when that knowledge comes with pain. David leaned forward, his eyes intense in the way she remembered from their early days together. Sarah, what if we're making a mistake? What if we're throwing away something that just needs fixing instead of replacing? We tried fixing it, David. For months we tried. Counseling, date nights, heart-to-heart conversations that went nowhere. Nothing worked. Maybe we were trying to fix the wrong things. Sarah curled her legs under her, unconsciously moving closer to him on the couch. What do you mean? Maybe we were trying to change each other instead of changing how we loved each other. David's voice was soft, thoughtful. You needed me to be more emotionally available, more willing to share what I was thinking and feeling. I needed you to give me space to process things internally before talking through them. We kept trying to make the other person different instead of finding ways to meet in the middle. The observation was more insightful than any they'd managed. During their months of marriage counseling, Sarah felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Even if that's true, she said carefully, there's still Rebecca. You can't just pretend that didn't happen. David's face darkened with something that looked like regret. Rebecca was a symptom, not the disease. I was feeling so disconnected from you, so unable to be what you needed, that when someone else showed interest, someone who didn't know all the ways I'd failed as a husband, it felt like a lifeline. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't. It makes it unforgivable, actually. But Sarah, if there's any chance we could find our way back to each other, I'll end things with Rebecca tonight. I'll do whatever it takes. Sarah felt tears starting to fall, a mixture of pain and longing and the terrible, wonderful possibility that maybe they weren't broken beyond repair. I don't know if I can trust you again, she whispered. David moved closer on the couch, close enough that she could smell his familiar cologne mixed with the autumn evening air that clung to his jacket. Then let me earn it back. Let me show you that I can be the husband you needed me to be all along. When he reached for her, Sarah didn't pull away. His hand cupped her face with the gentleness she remembered from their wedding day, his thumb brushing away her tears. I've missed touching you, he murmured. I've missed the way you fit against me, the way you sigh when I kiss that spot behind your ear, the way you look at me like I'm capable of being better than I am. David, we can't. But her protest died when his lips found hers, soft and familiar and full of promise. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a statement, but when Sarah kissed him back, it deepened into something desperate and hungry and full of months of separation and longing. They made love on her couch like teenagers, urgent and passionate and completely present with each other in a way they hadn't been in years. Afterward, as they lay tangled together under the throw blanket she'd brought from their shared home, Sarah felt the dangerous warmth of possibility spreading through her chest. "Stay tonight," she whispered against David's neck. "Sarah, just for tonight. We don't have to decide anything or make any promises. Just stay." David pulled her closer, his hands stroking her hair in the way that had always made her feel cherished and safe. "Okay, just for tonight." But they both knew it was already more than just one night. They both knew they were crossing a line that would change everything about their careful separation and their plans for divorce. They both knew they were falling back in love with each other at the worst possible time. The morning after brought harsh sunlight and the sharp ring of Sarah's phone. James's name appeared on the screen, a reminder of the life she'd been building outside her marriage, the uncomplicated future she'd been embracing. David was in her kitchen making coffee, moving through her small space with the unconscious ease of someone who belonged there. He'd slept in nothing but his boxers, and Sarah found herself distracted by the familiar landscape of his body, the way the morning light played across his shoulders. "You should answer it," David said without turning around, having obviously seen the caller ID. Sarah declined the call and set the phone aside. "This is complicated. It doesn't have to be." David turned to face her, holding 2 mugs of coffee prepared exactly the way they both liked it, a small intimacy that spoke of years of shared mornings. "Sarah, I ended things with Rebecca last night. After I left here, I went straight to her apartment and told her it was over. Just like that. Just like that." David set the mugs on her small dining table and pulled out a chair for her. "I told her that I'd been using her to avoid dealing with the problems in my marriage, and that wasn't fair to any of us." Sarah sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "How did she take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. She called me an idiot for choosing a woman who's divorcing me over someone who actually wants to be with me. Maybe she has a point." David sat across from her, the same position they'd been in when signing their separation papers months ago. But now, instead of legal documents, there was just coffee and possibility and the weight of decision between them. "Do you want to be with me, Sarah? Not the me I was when we separated, but the me I could be if we tried again, really tried this time." Sarah thought about James' kind, uncomplicated James who listened when she talked and never made her feel like she was asking for too much. She thought about the peace she'd found in her small apartment, the freedom of making decisions without considering someone else's needs and preferences. But she also thought about David's hands in her hair the night before, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, the completeness she felt when they moved together in the rhythm they'd perfected over years of loving each other. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared we'll fall back into the same patterns. I'm scared you'll get overwhelmed by my need for emotional intimacy, and I'll get frustrated by your need for space. I'm scared we'll hurt each other again. I'm scared too," David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if we'd fought for this instead of walking away." Sarah's phone rang again. James, persistent and caring and representing everything safe and new in her life. "Answer it," David said again. "He deserves to know where you stand." With trembling fingers, Sarah accepted the call. "James, hi, Sarah. I was worried about you after last night when your husband showed up at the coffee shop. You looked so upset." "I'm okay," Sarah said, her eyes locked on David's face. "But we need to talk." "Of course. When would be good for you?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to either fly or fall. "James, you're a wonderful man, and these past few weeks with you have been exactly what I needed. You helped me remember who I am outside of my marriage, and I'll always be grateful for that." "Sarah, but I'm still in love with my husband. I think I always will be. We've decided to try again, to see if we can build something better than what we had before." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, James spoke, his voice gentle despite what had to be disappointment. I hope it works out for you, Sarah. I really do. You deserve to be happy. And if happiness means finding your way back to each other, then I'm glad you're brave enough to try." When Sarah hung up, David was watching her with an expression of wonder and hope that took her breath away. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now we take it slow. We date each other again. But this time as the people we've become instead of the people we were when we got married. We go to counseling. But this time with the goal of learning how to love each other better. Instead of trying to change each other, we rebuild trust and intimacy and figure out how to be married to each other for real this time. And if it doesn't work," David stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her close enough that she could feel his heartbeat against her cheek. "Then at least we'll know we tried everything. But Sarah, I have to believe it will work. I have to believe that to people who love each other as much as we do, can figure out how to make each other happy." 6 months later, on the day their divorce would have been finalized, David and Sarah stood in the same courthouse where they'd filed their separation papers. But instead of signing documents that would end their marriage, they renewed their vows in a simple ceremony with just 2 witnesses and a judge who smiled. When David promised to love Sarah through all her complications, and Sarah promised to give David the space he needed to love her in his own way, the second time round, they both knew that love wasn't enough. It took work and patience, and the willingness to choose each other every day, even when it was difficult. But they also knew that some love stories are worth fighting for, even when the fighting requires you to battle your own worst instincts and fears. As they walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, Sarah wondered if they would have found their way back to each other if they hadn't almost lost each other completely. Some lessons, she supposed, could only be learned the hard way. The end. When do people realize they've been loving each other in all the wrong ways? Is it worth risking everything to learn how to love each other right? What would you have done? In Sarah's position, chosen the safety of something new, or the complicated hope of something rebuilt?